Good afternoon. It's Friday, May the 2nd, and if you've seen my email, I think I said in there that we're getting a slightly early launch of the course. I was thinking today that SOCI 6325 begins on May the 3rd, but it begins on May the 10th as a weekend college course, but it's alright. A week head start gives us some time, if you want to, of course, to get into the readings and that sort of thing. At least get a good idea of what we're going to be doing. So I thought I'd introduce myself, Steve Blanchard, and instructor in the course, talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today, kind of get it started. You can see my face, although I think everybody, maybe most everybody in the course, we've been together in one course or another, and maybe courses that I've done videos. So be nice if we all had videos, right? Then we could see one another. Maybe someday they'll get it to that point where we kind of in a visual blog where we're all on at the same time. We can see one another. So probably several years out, and not something will happen after you and I have left the university, either out of graduation or retirement, of course. Well, let's talk about the course. Here we are, just rattling along. This is SOCI 6325. It is demography. I posted some prof's notes. This is the text that you'll want to buy, and I posted already for this first segment, which takes us through the end of May, the several PowerPoint presentations by weeks, the author of the text, for each of those several chapters we have to read out of the text this month of May. And I post some other readings up there, my prof's notes, and there'll be one or two or three more of those during the course of May, and some PowerPoint presentations that I'd like for you to take a look at, and a World Health Organization document, and maybe a little more about those here in a second. So demography is about population structure and population change. Population structure is age distribution. Is it an old population, young population? What proportion are male? What proportion are female? The basic kind of, shall we say, biological demographic characteristics. It's not structure. It's not about educational levels and things like that. It's about issues that are like gender and age. And it's about not just the structure, but it's about process. How these features of the structure change over time. And you'll see as you read through the text and other readings that really what we talk about are transitions. The three basic components of change of populations are fertility. Fertility behavior changes. There is a transition in fertility, say from high fertility to low fertility. There is a mortality transition where mortality rates go from high mortality to low mortality, hopefully. And then there's a migration transition where people migrate from one place to another, make that transition across some principal large or major boundary, like a national boundary or a state boundary. And that kind of a transition of moving from one place to another, and once they're there, the transitions they go through has to become a larger part of the community of destination. So a lot of the process part is transition. We'll use that word quite a lot. There are two parts to, not really two parts, but two ways of looking at demography. There's the formal demography. Excuse me, that's the more mathematical side, and it's about rates. And we'll do a lot of rate calculation and talk about how all that takes place, and you'll see how that happens. Formal demography would define, say, the total fertility rate for a given population of women. A total fertility rate would be what's the average fertility of women in that population, and compare that average rate with an average in another population, that sort of thing. So the formal demography is more mathematical in terms of calculating rates. The other side of demography is social demography, and that is, shall we say, more of the explanation of why those rates occur. What are the features of education? What are the features of education that might change fertility? For example, and we'll talk more about this later, a couple where both are in university getting a degree, when they are after they're married, or say they're married both with undergraduate degrees, and they both have a professional career in front of them, they may make a decision as a couple not to have children right away, and they may make a decision about spacing their children, and they may decide that they'll have just 2 children, or 3 or something over the course of the next 5 years. If a woman, as you will find out, were to have a child in the natural fertility rate, she would have one about every year between the age of 15 and 35. So anything that we see that it's not a natural fertility rate is likely the decisions that are being made by population to influence, perhaps with contraception or some other way. But anyway, we'll talk about that. Social demography is about the explanation for why the rates occur and why the rates occur over time in that transition. So we'll have a good time in those conversations looking at how all that is. We'll look at it in the global thing. The population is growing. What is the context that's creating a growing population in the world? And we'll take it down to our county levels or some smaller geography, state, a little higher in county, of course, and look at it that way. The other way of thinking about this, another component of change in where I got my degree at University of Texas in Austin at the Population Research Center. It's a National Institutes of Health funded center. It's all about demography and demographic techniques, many of which you'll learn in this course, the formal side. But there's another dimension besides fertility, mortality, and migration, and that is ecology, human ecology. I think one way that we'll look at this, human ecology is another way of thinking about social demography. It is the ecological influence, social contextual ecological influences on people's decisions, or the ability to make a decision, or perhaps that create a barrier to improving one's health, or maybe a opportunities for changing one's fertility behavior or something like that. We'll explore that. So we're going to look at this sort of from an ecological standpoint. And when you'll have some readings, I don't want you to do yet, that are in the reading section up on Blackboard that will introduce you to concepts in ecology. They're old readings. I mean by that they're in the 20s, 30s, and 40s of the seminal writers in human ecology, and I think it's always good for graduate students to go back to the roots. You can always find something more current, but to take you back to the roots, the abuelos and grandparents, shall we say, of these theories and principles in demography, and see how they come up with these ideas. And so a lot of the readings will be readings from early in the demographic literature. I think it's a good place for you and me in a graduate class at a master's level to be at. So we'll look at fertility, mortality, migration, and ecology, human ecology, and more about that. It's also in my notes. The other thing that we want to do with this is we want to think of demography as a way of practical problem solving. Many things in community health. I'm a community health. I have a kind of a community health practice, I guess. You do a lot of pro bono work for metro health departments and things like that. Many of the measures of the success of the health of a community are expressed in terms of demographics. Demographic measures like mortality rates, fertility rates, the weight of children, birth weight of children. These are all indicators of upstream contextual processes, and we'll talk about upstream, that are influencing these rates. So in community health and in a lot of other areas, demographic outcomes of fertility, migration, and mortality are outcomes from upstream influences of context, the ecological thing, shall we say, or the social demography side is upstream, and the formal demography is the outcome. And you're going to see as we get into this, and many of you have already seen it because you've been in classes with me before, we're going to frame it. We're not statisticians in this class, but we're going to frame it in terms of y equals x plus w plus z. And y is the outcome of interest, a fertility rate, and z are the characteristics of, say, mothers, if it's fertility. W is characteristics of groups, race and ethnicity, and z is a characteristic of place, neighborhood, or time, 2010 as opposed to 2050. So we're going to model our thinking along that kind of an equation, And when you go up and you look at that, look at a couple of those PowerPoint presentations I have up there, plus that World Health Organization, you're going to see this social determinant framework. And that's the one we really want to have as the overriding framework for filtering and lining up relationships between data elements, whether in fertility, mortality, or migration. So it's going to be a good course. I think you're going to like it. It's not just theoretical, and it is about how we can use it to solve community problems. And I think I put it as a note, and we'll talk more about this because I do this kind of stuff all the time out in the community, and we'll talk more about this at a later video or something, notes. But for example, if one of the if a mortality rate, let's say from heart disease in the community of San Antonio is linked to high rates of diabetes that put a lot of stress on the cardiovascular system of an individual or of a population that has that rate of diabetes, then that's an outcome. That's the why. And then we can say upstream in the neighborhood where this population resides, that we know that if they were to get out and exercise, move around, move their cardiovascular system and exercise it, that it would lower the risk of obesity to them and put less pressure on their hearts and their cardiovascular. And because they're out walking, it will pump their blood and their heart, and it will strengthen them. And the idea there, it would lower the risk of death. So in that sense, if we put better streets or better lighting, parks, sidewalks in that neighborhood to give people opportunity to exercise, we would expect to see over the course of time, let's say, that the mortality rate due to diabetes would decline. It wouldn't go away, but it would decline. So this is the kind of way we want to think about it. The demographic outcomes as indicators of issues upstream in context are what we call ZI. And then if we're upstream, what can we do to change that dynamic to influence the downstream outcomes? So that's kind of the way we're going to do this. I look forward to it. There are some notes up there already. Of course, you've got the syllabus, and I look forward to getting in touch with you again this next week. I'll have another round of Prof's notes towards the end of next week. Those Prof's notes will deal with some summaries of the articles in the reading section. Don't read the reading section yet until I get those Prof's notes with you, and that way I can give you some guidance to you, so I give you some guidance as you go through them. And then somewhere around there, Thursday or Friday, I'll post another video on the readings. I'll sit here and go through the readings a little bit with you. And we'll do all that, and the semester won't really have started yet. Of course, we don't really have to get into it until the 10th. Also, late next week, I'll post a discussion thread on the website that will be kind of a thread that will guide our conversation and discussion over the course of May. I'm not going to post endless numbers of threads, but one for each segment, maybe two. And so I'll get one posted next week and let you know it's there to launch our discussions for this segment in May. All right. So it's good to see you again, and we're off on the journey of demography. And it's Friday afternoon. You'll have a good weekend, you hear, and a safe one. We'll be in touch.